Very great pleasure to introduce the closing plenary session and the person who will introduce the plenary speaker, Professor Sudipto Kaviraj.
Thank you, Janaki. And it's a particularly great pleasure for me to introduce Gopal. We have known each other for a very, very long time. He studied at JNU. I taught at JNU around the early years of JNU. He is now a professor of Indian politics at the Center for Political Studies in JNU. I don't want to stand between you and him for very long. He studied at the University of Aurangabad, appropriately, Ambedkar's millionth college, the college that he founded. He did his BA and MA there, and he got his MPhil and PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has published 3 books. The first is called Vernacular Buddhism. It's published in 1997. The second is Atrophy of Dalit Politics, 2005. And the last one, which he gave me yesterday, it's an edited book called Humiliation, Claims and Context. I'll say a couple of words about that later on. This was published just recently by the Oxford University Press in Delhi in 2009. He has also had a very interesting conversation with Sundar Sarukkai in the pages of the EPW, which some of you might have followed, in September 2009, where he wrote, Sarukkai wrote a paper on the phenomenology of untouchability, and Gopal wrote a rejoinder to that with the intriguing title, The Archaeology of Untouchability. It's a particular pleasure for me to introduce Gopal, not merely because of the length of time that we go back together, but I have learned a great deal from Gopal, from long conversations with him. And what I have learned most poignantly, I think, and most powerfully, is to think about the particular physicality, the kind of bodiliness of untouchability, which people who experience that bodiliness and people who do not, who only try to get into it intellectually, is a kind of ontological bar between the two sides, which is very, very hard to cross. This is linked to something, which I should confess publicly. I was one of the participants in this conference, and I want to tell you a little bit about the conference because I think that would show you the distinctiveness of Gopal's thinking. He told me once that, in what I learned in JNU and through conversations, etc., people like you gave us a lot of conceptual tools to think about exploitation, because JNU was an institution which was very heavily influenced by Marxism, highly sophisticated forms of Marxism, about exploitation and oppression. But you didn't actually help us think about humiliation, which is a different category. And one of the tasks of this conference was explicitly, I think Gopal wrote a note to everybody who came to the conference saying that I want you to write a paper on humiliation, and I want it not to be on exploitation or oppression, so that we can find a way, conceptual way of getting into it, which is exceedingly hard. And what I have to confess is that I was one of the participants in that conference. It was one of the most enriching conferences that I have participated in. But eventually I failed to write a paper, not simply because of lack of time and lack of discipline, which is true, but I found it exceedingly hard, to get into the problem from the kind of techniques and tools that I possess. Now, I also wanted to tell you very briefly about the significance, I think, of Gopal's work. I think Gopal has made very serious contributions in 3 fields. I also believe that we are probably on the cusp of a change in Dalit studies in India. We have had a lot of very interesting work on untouchability, the history of the Dalits, Ambedkar, and things like that. But I have a feeling that we have exhausted the earlier types of questions and the earlier types of techniques and what they could yield in understanding this very, very important phenomenon of Indian history and society. And I think we are sort of collectively groping towards a new set of questions, new set of techniques, and things like that. And I think in 3 of those, Gopal has actually made a very significant contribution in my view. The first of those is through his participation in policy questions, but which involve very large questions about finessing the idea of social justice and things, like the debate about subcategorization of reservations in Andhra Pradesh particularly. He participated energetically, and I think with great clarity of thought in some of those questions. I think his bringing out this book, Humiliation, should constitute an important contribution to the conceptual discussions about the problem of untouchability. Precisely this emphasis on the distinction. Distinction does not mean that they don't go together, or these do not actually exist convexly and complicatedly in the lives of the same individuals. Of course they go together. But I think it's also possible to make a very strong analytical case that we should learn to think about these 3 concepts separately, of oppression, exploitation, and humiliation. So I consider this book, which has a very distinguished set of authors, as very important. And finally, I think in many of the discussions that I have recently attended, part of this conference, some of which I have attended, a conference in our department recently by Anupama Rao, and many others, I think we are actually going back to some of the very interesting and deep questions in Ambedkar's own intellectual biography. You know, the shift in Ambedkar to Buddhism, I think, is something which needs to be taken very seriously. It's an extremely complex and deep question, because to my mind, as a political theorist, it actually constitutes a sort of choice, and I'm not very clear what the nature of Ambedkar's choice was, but he was certainly aware that he could make a choice, or he could actually refuse to make a choice and speak both the languages. But there's a very deep difference between a language of liberalism, which wants to obstruct the force of social injustice, the practice of untouchability, by the force of the state. So this is one way of dealing with it. This is one meaning of stopping untouchability or preventing untouchability. But there's also always the other possibility, which is the Gandhian meaning of the possibility of stopping untouchability, which is because untouchability exists not merely in the lives of the untouchables, but also in the minds and the lives of the Hindus. So eradication of untouchability might mean, on a certain interpretation, not merely stopping it by force, forcing people who have untouchability in their mind not to show it in their actual conduct, but something deeper, which is the eradication of untouchability. And I think this question goes on continually in the debate between Gandhi and Ambedkar, and it's reflected in Ambedkar's choice of conversion to Buddhism later on. So I think it's a very, very interesting question of the 2 languages, the language of liberalism, which uses one kind of categories, and the language of Buddhism, religion, compassion, etc., which uses quite different types of categories. So I think Gopal is also making important contribution to that. So with that, please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Gopal Guru.
Thank you. Dear friends, both female and male, I should thank Sudipto for giving this very rare privilege to me by way of introducing me to this very, very important and enlightened gathering in this hall. I now realize that why Sudipto didn't write for this volume. I kept on writing to him that he should tell me what's... I pursued, and I think I spent more time in pursuing him than anybody else. I wouldn't... But anyway, it's a great pleasure to also pursue things with Sudipto, because when you get something when we pursue. So I was not losing it, Sudipto. I gained something. Each time you tell me that why you are not writing. And that reasoning itself formed, sort of a very good... So I think it's a gain, and maybe sometime later, if I'm writing a rejoinder to this whole volume, later I will write that personal conversation with your permission. So I thank you very much for your kind words for me. The decency demands that I should also thank the organizers for inviting me to share my views with you and for having given me an opportunity to really listen to several speakers since yesterday. I think it was a very, very rewarding and rich experience that I have had since yesterday. So I'm really thankful to the organizing committee particularly. I don't want to name them and embarrass them, but I really thank them for this opportunity. I should also take this opportunity to thank this Taraknath Das Foundation for inviting me as the first professor of this chair. And I'm going to be around for 2 weeks and likely to bore you, and this is a warning. So please bear with me. I'll be making noise here and there, but thank you for that very, very rare opportunity that you have provided with me. I had come here and Gauri had invited me in 2003, I think, and then I had an exciting time with the participants and the scholars. So I spoke something on theoretical Brahmins and empirical Shudras. So that was the start. I started this phrase from Columbia actually. So I developed over a period of time and then it was published in EPW later. I don't want to spend more time on my own personal details. Let me get back to what I'm trying to say today. The title, I have titled my presentation like, is there an idea of ideal in Ambedkar? Some of you might really question as to why I'm starting with a question. Is there an idea of ideal in Ambedkar? And as Alusi has already given some clue in the morning that the question of ought, is an ideal in Ambedkar. I think that's a very interesting starting point. So I would like to build on to the insight that I got since yesterday, and I will try to also join issues with people who spoke about different dimensions of Ambedkar's contribution to our thinking, imagination, politics, self-transformation, and emancipation. Why I'm raising this question, there's a problem. I see a problem in this question. Unless you really raise this question, you will not be able to really decide the epistemic status of a thinker. It is only through this ideal you really then judge that a person is a thinker. So this is the standard through which you can really decide the normative capacity of a person like Ambedkar. If there is no ideal, I'm already hinting at, if it is policy, and then I think the epistemic character would go down. So I think I'm already making a choice between policy and ideal. And I'm suggesting already that policy cannot be an ideal. It's a very provocative statement I'm making, but we can come back and discuss. So I think the question is so important that you have to use this notion of ideal to declare or judge that Ambedkar was a thinker. If you fail to raise this question, then I think the tragedy with Ambedkar would be that he is reduced to a Dalit thinker, a leader, or a constitutional maker. I mean, this yesterday's morning session. The question therefore I'm asking is, was he a simply constitutional maker? Was he a leader of the Dalits? Was he a strategist? What was he? And therefore I think it's a tragic question that is associated with Ambedkar. And it's not the fault of Ambedkar, it is the problem with those people who actually, as Nicholas Dirk has really very rightly pointed out, caste of mind. The question of, a larger question, a question of locating ideal in Ambedkar doesn't really occur to this caste of mind. And therefore, I would say, in Toni Morrison's words, as blacks in the US do not grow in the eyes of whites, similarly, Ambedkar doesn't grow in the eyes of the Brahmins or upper caste in India. It's a bit rhetorical statement I'm making, I know that. But the reality is that you always see in pages, Ambedkar was a reader of the Dalits, he was a strategist, and he was a constitution maker. That's, I think, a little unfair. This is what I think. Therefore, in order to really assign a kind of a full and final recognition to Ambedkar is to raise this question of what is the ideal in Ambedkar. And that's why I think I've chosen this title. This question also has a moral significance. Is there an idea of ideal in Ambedkar? This also has a moral significance. And why I'm saying this, there is a moral significance to this question? Because for some good reasons, Ambedkar has not become a fashion. Luckily. Therefore, I'll also work on Ambedkar's ideal, and that's fine, that's fashion. And also, Ambedkar hasn't become a concern for fascination. That's to say, you have Ambedkar's ideal, and you also have ideals of others, Plato, Aristotle, and Gandhi perhaps. And then I will take pleasure in comparing Ambedkar's ideal with other ideal. And so I feel fascinated. So in a way, I consume Ambedkar through fascination. But there is a tragic side to this as well. Therefore, I will introduce third term: passion, fascination, and fate. And I'm approaching the question of ideal through fate. Now, why I'm saying it is a fate? Because there is a ruthless denial of this ideal in Ambedkar. And ironically from the Gandhian, and I will name them, and I think we have to name. If he's in one of these conversation warned me that one has to engage not only in transparent conversation, but also honest conversation. And that is what he has been teaching us right from 77. I hope he doesn't disown me as a student. So I think that's a problem with the conversation has to be there, and the conversation has to be honest. I would name them. Ironically, these are Gandhians who are very ruthless in really denying this idea of ideal in Ambedkar. Secondly, there's also a denial, and very skillful denial, of ideal in Ambedkar. And this denial is very skillful in the sense that they don't deny that there is no ideal in Ambedkar. But it plays a secondary role to the superior ideal which is sitting in the West. And there are some scholars here in this hall, and I will make a special reference to Christopher Quinn's understanding. We haven't changed, sir. You haven't changed, I haven't changed my own opinion about Ambedkar since 1997. So that is the subordination of ideal of Ambedkar to the Western as a superior. And the third one is about, there is also a denial of ideal in Ambedkar through naive understanding of Ambedkar by Dalits. Now I will have to explain as to how there's a varying degree of denial in all the three positions. Let me therefore find out how these three levels of denial really is doing damage to the ideal which is very much there. This was very noted Gandhian in India. He's no more, but he's still influential. Professor K.J. Shah was the Gandhian professor at Dharwad, as Anu must be knowing. And he, in a very painful comparison with Gandhi, said Gandhi, of course, was the ideal of Rama Rajya, because his commitment to the human good was impeccable. And there is a consistency in this commitment to that human good. So the concern is universal. Therefore, here in Gandhi, what happens, universal, the concern for universal human good becomes ideal. And he says, compared to Gandhi, Ambedkar is narrow. Concern about only the Dalits. I quoted, I'm not throwing something from, dishing out something from my pocket. It's there, all references are there. If somebody is is interested, I can show those references. You trust me, please. So, the notion of sacrifice, seva, and self-purification in Gandhi becomes an ideal for K.J. Shah. And compared to Gandhi, Ambedkar doesn't have that commitment, that sacrifice, that vision for this, for the human being, human good. Now, one can really debate this, but I think this one very, very hard. This is very ironical. Gandhi wouldn't have really used these words actually. Gandhi, the relationship between Gandhi and Ambedkar has been of a very, very complicated nature. We simplify it for our own reasons. We polemicize it for our own reasons. But the relationship between the two is complicated, and I think it's a different issue of debate, and we can take it up later at some other occasion. So that's one. The other one is very interesting. Professor R. Srinivasan, who is still around, he is taught political theory in Bombay University and got retired and settled in Chennai. He wrote in one of the very leading journals in Mumbai, in Maharashtra, that Ambedkar doesn't have an ideal, because all the time what Ambedkar was doing, according to him, was to really make a reference to the past to organize his thought and action for the moment. He suggests, Srinivasan suggests, that he should have really made a reference to the universal principles which are there embodied in Thomas Paine and Jefferson. And Jefferson and Thomas Paine are the ideal for Srinivasan, and which Ambedkar fails to follow. Now the question, and I think it's a debate, and somebody was making a point yesterday, there should be a rupture between history and there should be delinking between history and present, contemporary. I think this is a very wrong way of really looking at the historical questions of untouchability and caste. Now, Srinivasan is suggesting that, look here, you have to forget the past. Don't have any reference to atavistic past, because you have ideals already sitting in the West. Why don't you follow it? Ambedkar refuses to follow the advice of Srinivasan anyway. And that's why his ideal emerges through the historical navigation. There's no other route. And that's why I may not agree with somebody who says it's a tabula rasa. No. It's not a clean slate. There are historical roots. Phule and Ambedkar are together in owning up Buddhism. Their source of imagination and challenges they confront is Buddhism. Both of them. And that's why Phule becomes the guiding force for Ambedkar, as Kabir and Buddha, of course. So I think that that's the problem with Srinivasan. But I would like to ask one more question as to why people advise Ambedkar not to go to the past. Because past has delicate details about your wrongdoings. And you don't want to really own up those delicate details. And that's what is bypass past. And I would have used really Heideggerian term. It is only through existentialism you find the difficult questions. And I will also later talk about what is the principle of co-responsibility. But I think that's a politics of really suggesting kind of a universalism to Ambedkar. It's a politics of universalism. You might ask the question to Ambedkar whether there is any universal in Ambedkar. We'll decide. And I'm going to discuss something about it later. If time permits, sir, please stop me whenever you feel like stopping me, because you are still my teacher. So this is one. About the waste, and there are three scholars, as I said, Professor Spin, and I think, sir, you have a very complicated position you developed in your article. And I would discuss with you. Please rectify if I'm really not representing your views faithfully. Please rectify that. But the other two sources I would like to quote here. One is, I don't know how to pronounce them, Fiske was Columbia University professor, and an Emmerich, these two, and this 1997 A.K. Narayan's volume. They said the Buddhism that Ambedkar adopted is based on Western philosophy and more particularly American pragmatism. And John Dewey very prominently in his mind, in their mind. Now, I am not denying that Ambedkar had some bearing on Western political thought. But that does not make him acute. That doesn't make his choice of Buddhism acute. The clinching is not in the West. The clinching is in the East. Therefore, I wouldn't say that Ambedkar's discourse on Buddhism was derivative in character. And I might say it was maybe very deeply, authentically Deshi. And Deshi does not mean that RSS Deshi. Not at all. It's a very, very subaltern, non-Brahmanical Deshi, which is there in Phule, Periyar, and Ayodhya Dasa, and Lakshmi Natsun, several of others. And Aloysius are making this point. So that is the rich tradition that is coming up, that is available to Ambedkar, and the ideal is emerging through this Deshi tradition. And I'm not denying that his encounter with the West and reconciliation with the West only helped him in really developing a proper context, a formative context for his ideal to emerge. So that's the point I would, when we can discuss this, and I'm really running into a difficulty now, I can see that. But we will discuss this later. The last one is about the naivety. It's a very, very, very difficult terrain I'm really treading. Since yesterday we have been having discussion on policy, and Shivgami, they are very, 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 very committed scholars, and she's a scholar, and then she's scholar first, and IS officer later, and Sudharani, everybody mentioned about this. The mainstream discourse in India is on policy. Yeah, is it okay? Is it okay? Am I audible sufficiently? Okay. Now, the Dalit politics has a problematic relationship with the Ambedkar's ideal. The Dalit politics, which is primarily based on the politics of social engineering, by definition rules out any possibility of ideal. And I am taking this clue from Professor Sir Karl Popper. I would like to ask questions. Is there any ideal in Karl Popper? And I think these people are following Sir Karl Popper and not Ambedkar. And that's why it's a naive. They don't realize. The Dalits do not realize what are they doing. And that's a tragic part of it. And thanks, Janaki, you've given me the chance to speak this openly here. So that's a tragedy of the Dalit politics, and we can develop this argument later. And it's a difficult argument. You might say Ambedkar himself was a policy-driven personality. Yes, fair enough. We can discuss that later. Everything is later. I don't know when will say. Now, yesterday's 2 points, Gyan make a very, very interesting case for difference. And I think I will have to still think about it very carefully, Gyan. Very closely I'll think about it. But I think, was Ambedkar producing ideal through difference? I'm paraphrasing you. You may not agree with this, but that's what I got from your presentation. Therefore, you cherish the difference as an ideal. And we can also think about it. I will have to elaborate on this later. Now, based on these 5 to 6, and there's one interesting, I can't really resist mentioning this. There was a very, very vibrant, committed kavi, shair, or a poet, or balladeer, I don't know, Vaman Kardak. Vaman Kardak has a very strong imagination and imagery about Ambedkar's ideal. He says Ambedkar's ideal is like an ocean. And I will link it up with Vaman Dada later. It's an ocean where all the rivers of Jainism, rivers of saint tradition, all those rivers, they are in a great hurry to really merge into the flow very, very fast to merge into this ocean. What a strong imagination. But that's another ideal that we have. Now, based on all these 5 to 6 positions, I have 5 questions. And I don't know whether I will have time to go through each of them at length. What is the ideal I'm talking about in Ambedkar? First question, very, very, very natural question that comes to our mind in the context of the discussion that I already had here. How does it develop into a project of ideal? What is its historiography? It's basically a historical question, deeply as I mentioned to you. I have already given some hints that it's a historical question, historically rooted question. What are the internal and external normative resources or properties that constitute this ideal? That's to say, whether it is completely derivative or deshi. That's the point. Fourth point. Is it political? That mediates Dalit question, particularly Dalit question and more generally questions of poor through political concepts like equality, liberty and justice. I think the point that Sudipta was making was the language of liberalism and language of Buddhism. Can you really reach and redeem ideal of Ambedkar through the language of liberalism, through the concept of liberty, equality and justice? I'm already suggesting that these are not sufficient conceptual framework for redeeming the ideal of Ambedkar, which really looms larger than these limiting concepts. And that then it enters in the realm of values. And therefore I'll then make 2 points there. One is value of karuna, that is love, and maitri, that is friendship. If you want, comradeship. But maitri is fine. Maitri is fine. So I think I will not be having enough time to discuss this a bit complicated area of discussion, but I can discuss this not later, but whenever it is there. And the last point is, is Buddhism based on karuna and maitri a universal principle, or is it only meant for the Dalits? We have a common understanding that Ambedkar's Buddhism only for the Dalits. I'm going to argue, no, it is not. It is least concerned with the Dalits. Not at all. It's more concerned with, as Gajendran would say in his definition of Dalit. We had a long debate. It's basically for the ideal untouchable. And in that particular debate with Sundar Sarukai, we are raising this point. Who is this ideal untouchable? Is to liberate this ideal untouchable, the Brahmanical. Ideal and the actual. Actual untouchable is always hoping to be the natural follower of Buddhism. Not natural, but natural. Now, what is the ideal? I think I don't know how much time I have.
You have another 15 minutes.
Oh, I don't have time. So
then we can have some discussion.
Okay, well, I'll just stop there. I'll just read some important thing. In Ambedkar's writings and speeches, the idea of ideal is permeated like a running thread. However, it is quite centrally defined in his 2 seminal works, The Annihilation of Caste and Buddha and his Dhamma. In Annihilation of Caste, Ambedkar clearly spells out idea of ideal, in particular response to Gandhian critique of his understanding of Hinduism. It is all the time Gandhi. You know, in Jatpat Todak Mantra, Ambedkar was invited, and then later on the organizer found that this explosive material is going to present. So the invitation cancelled. And then then Gandhi wrote, "Oh my God, what do you know about Hinduism?" He asked Ambedkar, "What do you know about Hinduism?" "You don't know about Hinduism." But then he says, then Ambedkar gets back in debate with Gandhi. I think Gandhi was a solitary interlocutor of Ambedkar of anybody. So that's it. In his response to Gandhi, Ambedkar lays down several definitional criteria for his ideal. According to him, ideal is ideal because it is universally applicable. First criteria. Ideal is ideal because it is universally applicable, therefore it is for everybody, including Dalits. He further states that the ideal for the few cannot be the ideal. Few is, in his case, is the top of the toys born. That's a term I have devised. And Aloysius doesn't like this term. He wants a straightforward message. He further, he is making his point in the context of Hinduism being ideal only for a few who, according to him, construct Hinduism in such a way so as to extract acquiescence of many through mechanical affirmation of Hinduism. And therefore, anything which is imitated, followed blindly, cannot be an ideal. Hinduism is full of that. Therefore, Ambedkar's ideal has to be reached and thought about seriously through critical thinking, and therefore critical thinking is a precondition for really thinking about the ideal, not the affirmative, not the mechanical affirmation of the texts that are there in plenty in Hinduism. Second, Ambedkar argues that ideal that is sustained at the cost of humiliation of many cannot be the ideal. And therefore for Ambedkar's ideal, what is the core principle of ideal in Ambedkar? The normative core principle of ideal in Ambedkar is Manuski. And Manuski is his own word. Phule and Ambedkar's Manuski is dignity. You can define it differently. So Manuski becomes the core principle of his ideal. And Hinduism is full of humiliation, and therefore it cannot be an ideal, because there is no respect for human being. For him, the social system which contains caste hierarchy cannot be morally defended and hence cannot be the ideal. He, in reply to Gandhi, on another occasion says, it may be wrong and uncharitable to judge an ideal by its worst specimen. And caste and varna system are two worst specimens for Ambedkar. Third, along with dignity, karuna and maitri, these are two essential constituent ethical components of ideal in Ambedkar. Buddhism for Ambedkar thus becomes a philosophical framework within which ideal could be imagined and realized through Panchashila and Arya Ashtangik mark. The ethical order based on Maitri and love is the ultimate stage where it is possible to realize a perfect ideal in Ambedkar. Finally, according to Ambedkar, ideal is ideal because it is realizable. Otherwise, if the ideal, normally in Plato and others, ideal is not realizable. And that's why, it's something which exists beyond time and space, so you can't just reach there. But in Ambedkar, it's reliable. You might compare him with Hobbes, I don't know, Sudipto, but in Hobbes, it's all realizable. Moral minimum that Hobbes is suggesting. But I think it's realizable in a different sense, not in Hobbesian sense. We can debate that later. Thus in Ambedkar, ideal is not ahistorical, neither it is romantic as it is there in Gandhi. So it has to be created through creative thinking and active human intervention, both in politics and imagination. Ambedkar's idea of ideal seems to follow certain methodological routes. And there are methodological routes that the ideal of Ambedkar is proceeding further. The first is there's historically situated ideal. That's to say, it doesn't really entertain those ideals which do not exist within time and space limits. And his debate, his commentary on Jnaneshwara, the 13th century saint, Varkari saint. Jnaneshwara's story, I don't know whether you know, but Jnaneshwara was a Brahmin person along with three brothers, his siblings. He was outcast by his own caste people. And then he's reabsorbed. And his argument is that, I can be absorbed because I'm a Brahma. And the core of my being is wisdom, so I am a Brahma, I can be reabsorbed. Ambedkar asked him, if you can be readmitted into the order of the Brahmanism, and you think Brahma exists outside this, Brahma has no problem with space and human being, why don't you come to Maharwada and stay there? But Jnaneshwara doesn't come to Maharwada, he goes to Brahminwada. I think this Brahma, then therefore I think Ambedkar exposes these limits of this Brahma, and therefore it can't be an ideal for him because it doesn't testify itself in terms of the time and space. The space is so important in terms of purity pollution notion in India. So I think that's out. The other one is, I think there was a mention today, was a clean slate. I think and Daniel, you made point, and I think you're right in terms of reading Hindu Buddhism of Sri Lanka. I think there are very problematic cases. Even the untouchability is not addressed there. But I think Ambedkar also was looking for two kinds of evidences. One is historical textual evidence. The other one is a practical contemporary evidence. And the practical evidence he gets only from Burma. He finds practices there. In 1955, 1954, 55, he goes there and he finds the Panchashil and Trisharan being practiced by people. But more importantly, his ideal, he settles down in, growing consolidation of his ideal is found in his own study of the history of Buddhism. He is narrativizing the experiences that Buddhism, one finds with Buddhism in the history of India. You find that Ambedkar is giving narratives of Buddhism, how it was great and all that, to his own followers, and that reference is always there. You also have references of Greek legends and all that, but more prominently it is Buddhist legend, Buddhist history that figures very prominently in his pedagogical exercise. Therefore, I think for Ambedkar, history is pedagogy. And history becomes pedagogy for Ambedkar only through Buddhism. And that's a very, it's a very, very compelling insight that one gets from Ambedkar. Now the last question I don't have a question to sort of language of liberalism, and I don't have time to throw some light on language of liberalism and language of Buddhism. But I think I would, I have mentioned, mention about the difference thing, which is very important, I think. I will have to speak something about it, and then I'll close. Yeah, yes, I'll start from here. Sorry, just a bit of I don't know. Yeah. So if I'm under pressure, I think you will give me some time, 5 minutes more. However, it would be hasty to conclude that the Burmese context was singularly responsible in shaping Ambedkar's choice on Buddhism. Alongside the time-space dimension, it is also necessary to keep in mind that his ideal is also sensitive to its immediate socio-historical context. In fact, taking a cue from Sudipto Kaviraj's perceptive observation, and you can correct me if I am wrong, it could be possible to argue that it is not the ideal that chooses its context. It is, in fact, the context that chooses its ideal. And I think I have a long 3 pages note on critique of Marxism in India, but I'm skipping that. It is in this sense Ambedkar adopts Neo Buddhism with a new interpretation appropriate to modern context. And that's why Aloysius' point becomes very significant. Similarly, Ambedkar's idea of ideal becomes intelligible only in the context of the critique of the contending notions of ideal. It is in this sense, I argue, Ambedkar's idea of ideal has got historicity to it in the sense that it moves through and ultimately acquires a unified meaning. Unified meaning is a problematic term I'm using because most of the postmodernists will be very, very deeply angry with me. Now, because there's a dissolution of Ambedkar into postmodernism, and I think we should guard against it. It ultimately acquires a unified meaning and universal appeal through complete rejection of some ideal and critical appropriation of some other ideas which belong to the same logical class. This is Sudipto's term I picked up from his class. Thus, Ambedkar resolutely rejects the reigning ideal, and I have no time to read what is reigning ideal, which coincides with the idea of the ideal untouchable. The ideal untouchable is one, the Brahmin, who is practicing untouchability against his wife, against his kids and extreme forms of untouchability. That's why it is ideal. Ambedkar rejects this ideal primarily because it draws its sustenance from the actual, the untouchable ideal, who in a pernicious asymmetry of social relationship is reduced to the level of walking carrion. He's a walking carrion. This is, I think, Barrington Moore's term I'm using here. Ambedkar also rejects the reigning ideal, the Brahmanical, on the ground that it does not motivate people. It does not motivate people to adopt the principle of co-responsibility. This principle seeks to morally compel a person to inherit the questions from the past. And that's very important, I suppose. And that's why the difference principle may not work here. Inherent the question from the past. These questions primarily relate to contestation of social relationships that seeks to perpetuate asymmetry between the ideal and the actual untouchable. It is through this sharing of historical questions that opens up the possibility of imagining alternative ideal and ultimately making it one's own. And the Ambedkar's ideal, Ambedkar's alternative ideal thus addresses the ideal untouchable more than the actual untouchable. One would have expected the ideal untouchable to get motivated by the principle of co-responsibility and ultimately own up Ambedkar's idea of ideal, making its own. But now it is Mahar Buddhism, to cut it short. So what a tragedy. It is for universal and you are reducing it to Mahar Buddhism. And only the Dalits themselves are doing it. And the others feel happy about it. Ambedkar's ideal thus entails a strong element of moral responsibility to liberate the untouchable, the ideal untouchable, from latest self-imposed exclusion. And to put differently, Ambedkar's ideal holds out a promise to convert the folded body. Since there was a body in Roja's very interesting paper yesterday. Convert the folded body of an ideal, untouchable, into a flowing body across time and space. And body we don't discuss much in political theory anyway. As it takes place in one of the most influential fiction, Sanskara, Anantmurthy's. It's another text, this Gyanpith Award, you are Anantmurthy's Sanskara. Wonderful text. Since Ambedkar's ideals addressee are all the moral agents, including the ideal untouchables. Application of ideal cannot be limited only to the particular segment of society. That's why the difference principle is a problem. Ambedkar tries to identify both himself and his immediate social constituency and his opponents with the content of his ideal. Hence, his idea of ideal has an inclusive character. This inclusive proposition proceeds through the political to the ethical, and I'm just slightly hinting at this liberalism, language of liberalism and Buddhism. He seeks to transform the rough, and the ideal is also, the ideal untouchable is also the rough, the particular, the adamant, the non-negotiable other into universally reconcilable together. The together is a term I'm using, it's a funny term I'm using, we have to approve of it, I'm seeking approval here. Not by using meta-ethical or theological principle, but through the ethical, which in Ambedkar relates to mutual touch and face-to-face. And I'm using face of Buddha as the ideal. Thomas, yesterday I got... I'll just do that. Thomas Anson and I had an interesting time yesterday in the evening. I wasn't in spirit. So this is the ethical which is in Ambedkar relates to mutual touch and face-to-face and immediate and the immediate and the concrete. It is in this sense Buddha's ethical face, the Prasanna Mudra, becomes the ideal for Ambedkar. And you can develop a theory on what is the ethic of face, and there's some reference to Levinas and all. But in Buddha, there's a face. Face is so important. You go to Ajanta and Ellora, you find Buddha as smiling Buddha all the time. Though there's suffering inside, but smiling. There's no fake smile on the face. Very authentic, ontologically related to his being, which is deeply humanitarian. So that's why I think there's no, I think this is a very, very important point. Ethical in Ambedkar is participatory and hence foregrounds itself in the political practice. I think I'll leave it here. I'll just make a small point on this is what the ideal is about. The last point is about what does it do with equality, liberty, and and justice, and I think for Ambedkar these are all limiting concepts which are linked up to distribution. Distribution itself is very problematic. As we know, in India, distribution has its own limitations. I mean, the limitations are endemic to distribution. That's why endemic to liberalism, language of liberalism. Because, and he has critiqued state, he has critiqued constitution, he has critiqued everything. He has critiqued bureaucracy, including Dalit bureaucracy, everything. He sees the limitations in it, And that's why he wants, he is suggesting that, there is something more to state and market. The relationship, the life, there's more to life, and this is a very conservative position than one might take. But I think it's very important that for Ambedkar, there is a sphere which exists outside state and market, outside these three languages, equality, liberty, and justice. And then and therefore I think that the sphere cannot be regulated by the three concepts. It has to be regulated by, it is actually guided by these two principles, Maitri and Karuna. Karuna and Maitri actually quickly, why he doesn't really settle, and I think Masood's paper was interesting, why he doesn't settle for Christianity, Islam and Sikhism, because they are the replica of Hinduism, to cut it short. To short circuit the argument that there is as if the casteism was not perfect in Hinduism, you are reproducing one. So that's why he's mentioning his own thing. That's the whole reason. He is really, and then therefore the touch in the notion of touch in Christianity and in Islam is limited. And he's going beyond that. I think it's a very, it's a deeply, it's deeply ontological equality is talking about. Equal treatment to everybody. All living bodies in water, plants, trees, and human being. That's the brotherhood his love is meant for. And I think in all, I think it's ethical. Ethical is the ideal in Ambedkar, and ethical is Buddhism, and that's why it is an ideal. I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gopal. This actually gives us a lot of time for questions. So, Gopal, you would take some questions now? Yeah. I'll leave it to you to take the questions, but why don't you start? No, yeah.
Thank you, Gopalji, for an enlightening speech. I just wanted to point out the last point, equality. Ambedkar's discourse on women's equality started with, in his writings it is reflected everywhere, but particularly regarding Buddhism, the rise and fall of the Hindu women. In Mahabodhi article 51, he wrote that as a counter to the women's journal, there is that, Buddhism was responsible for downfall of Hindu women. So then he goes clause by clause, citing the examples of Manusmriti, how it degraded women's status in the society, and goes on constructing Buddhism for the women's equality, how it created a platform. But I found that, this Ambedkar's discourse of women's equality, or the place of women in Buddhism, or the Buddhism contribution to the women's equality was not taken forward by the following discourses. How do we look into this kind of a thing? Because it's raised there and it was not taken further by the following scholars. Thank you.
Gopal, would you like to respond to individual questions, or should we group questions? If there are questions which are related, then I think we should.
I'm glad that you brought out the point that the Western mind holds Ambedkar only secondary to some Western leaders in the international context, and in the Indian context only next to Gandhi. I suppose I'm right when I say this. And what I find is Ambedkar as a universal humanist has never encountered contradictions in his own statements or deeds. But whereas Gandhi, I find, He advocates peaceful non-cooperation. And he has experimented in South Africa. And next he experiments in India. Now entire world says, oh, it's a good theory that everyone can follow. But why he didn't apply the same to the Dalits? He never said to Dalits, please don't cooperate with the Hindus. It is not at all universal. So he's partial, parochial. I just want to classify that way, one. The second point I want to make is, so why somebody also made a point that why Ambedkar embraced Buddhism compared to many other religions. I don't have much theories on it, but I feel, I don't also believe in reincarnation, but I don't see any difference between Buddha and Ambedkar. And that's how he has, embraced Buddhism. These are the 2 points. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take the questions.
My name is Pinkus Javits, and my subject is sustainable development, and my question is about a fast forward to today and tomorrow. India has a potential of becoming world power number 1, Asia power number 1. It has difficulty in surpassing China because exactly what we heard here today. The question is about technology becoming a new religion for India. My question to you is, if untouchability is a real problem, or rather the unjustified feeling of superiority of the Brahmin, that is a real problem.
I'm not an academician, I'm an actor. Whatever works, it works for me. I listened to the whole conference. My question is, this I never thought about it. Indians do not seem to accept to take the issue of untouchability to the international arena. Whereas apartheid, because yesterday one speaker said, no, we can't take it to sanctioned regime, which is international. But whereas if you listen to Desmond Tutu, he says it is apartheid. It seems like they are more interested to make it international. Is it because, I don't know why, untouchability issue has not been, is it because we are lacking like cases like some of those radical Sekhi and some of those incidents that shocks the conscience of the human beings? I'm wondering why. I'm not here to advocate, but I just a thought in my head. Maybe you can clear it.
I'm Mohan. Finally, just say you concluded with the ideal is face of Buddha, and also you said that smiling. And I would say that just with smiling and tolerating white racism, Martin Luther King Jr. was able to construct an anti-racism, in a way, in his own style, tolerating and like that. Is it like smiling, denoting that toleration to untouchability or atrocity like that? Just with that ideal, he just focused the entire, movement, and I don't think that the implication, whatever the impact we have, still it's living in India. As a threat, big threat to Brahmanism or Shudraism, anything like that, casteism. Is it? I don't think just with smiling, the concept he made, the ideal. It includes, it's a big threat to Hinduism. It's a big threat. It's not just, maybe it's not materialistic, but it's more than materialistic. Thank you.
Gopal, would you take
I
these
think
questions?
I think you are suggesting more. Instead of going for smiling Buddha, you must go for angry Buddha. So okay, we'll do that. I'm with you. Now my debate with Lokmitra and others, some debate took place sometimes. So we'll go for angry Buddha, I'm with you. But there's a purpose. When smiling Buddha, as it goes, it really foreground, it presupposes certain ethical everyday processes, can you hear you? Yeah. So I'd say it's a.
One thing I can tell you, when the Parliament, Indian Parliament, enacted the law, untouchability is prohibited. All the Congress people, parliamentary, declared and distributed sweets. But our leader came out and cried like anything, in anger. That's why I say that, was it just like simply like smiling Buddha?
No, the ultimate is smiling, and also you find that, when you are smiling, you are already implicating several normative vocabulary in this smiling. It's not simply an empty smile. It's a smile which is loaded with, historical processes, mood motivated by this normative vocabulary, like, winning over people through love, reasoning out with them, showing them that difficulties and faults. You just cannot use this. You cannot acquire this, or you cannot achieve this through the state machineries and institutions, because the life which is beyond institutions cannot be handled by these language of liberalism. It has to be language of Buddhism. That's the ultimate. But the problematic area is that what does Ambedkar suggest? What is the notion of politics and what is the notion of state in him? We'll have to discuss that. He's already disappointed with the existing structures that doesn't promise anything. And so, but he's already working on that. But and RPA and other things are there, but they are not the sufficient condition for achieving this. So I think that's. Let us see that smiling is the complete final reflection of what Buddha wants to achieve actually. And the processes really follow this smiling. Smiling is not it's this embedded smiling, so to say. It's not a fake or empty smile as we find in modernity of today.
Janaki, should we stop now? Or?
So now I have to
I don't have to do any closing remarks other than invite people to
No, in that case.
Can I just say something?
Okay, in that case, what?
So I have to these 2-3 points.
Actually, there was one point which I want you to address particularly.
Oh, this one, the other one, the superiority of the Brahmins.
And also about the women.
Yeah, the women is in. I mean, see, in Ambedkar's Buddhism, you find that the references to women becoming very, very significant addressee of Buddhism in Ambedkar. But I think what Ambedkar also is pointing out is the debate between Buddha and Ananda. Actually, this is a very difficult debate that took place between Ananda and Buddha. Buddha wasn't in favor of really accepting women into the Sangha. Because 550 years, if you admit women into Sangha, the fate of Buddhism will be only 500 years. If you don't admit, it will be 5,000 years. That's it. But Ananda reasoned out with Buddha. Actually, it's nothing. You are a religion of equality, and how can we keep women out? Because it's a very problematic thing. So then Buddha accepts that. And Ambedkar carries forward that dialogue. But it's a different thing that today's Buddhists, so-called Buddhists, do not really follow that. Anyway, so that's other thing.
Should we take a few more questions?
And then one final point is this technology. I think you said very interesting observation. Superior Brahmins and untouchability are two different things. Untouchability is a matter of technology, and therefore it's not. But I think actually in India is a election. They say it's a very amazing, incredible country actually, which really mixes technology with Brahmanism. For example, you go to a Xerox shop, the photocopying, and it is owned by the Brahmin in Sadashiv, Pune. I think Janaki will really confirm this. The machine won't accept this certificate because it's a caste certificate. So they're very smart. Okay.
Okay. I'll take a few more questions. First you and two of you from there. But you should be concise in your questions, and then I'll give some time to Gopal and
just quickly.
Yeah.
My question is linked to this one statement. I want Professor Guru to respond. religious persecution is not a thing of today. It is as ancient as the religion itself. It tries and purifies the persecuted who have themselves staunch in their faith. If Harijans can patiently bear persecution, they are bound to come triumphant at the end. So this is the statement of Gandhiji. Meaning persecution has to be patiently, you should pursue it. You should still have a staunch faith. And you are also talking about smiling Buddha. Is there any link that persecution, patient hearing of persecution can bring a positive result? Thank you.
Sarai Masood. My question is that in 1936, Dr. Ambedkar appreciated Islam and Christianity. Both religions don't have a caste system by rule. And what is the reason instead of both religions he accepted Buddhism?
I think you have better knowledge of Islam. I think it's a anyway, I'll get back to that.
My name is Subhash. I just want to make one comment on what you said. Is people who favor Gandhi and project him as an idealist who had ideals, his ideal was Ram Rajya. My very question is, Ram Rajya is not really an ideal Rajya to begin with, because during the time of Rama, who is believed to be an incarnation of God, he himself assassinated Shambhu Shudra for practicing penance, which he was not supposed to practice. And secondly, Sita, in spite of her being loyal to Rama all his life, he made her take Agni Pariksha. So such a Rajya cannot be.
My name is Yogeshwar. I had a privilege to be in Nagpur when Dr. Ambedkar converted to Buddhism. There he gave the very clear definition why we converted to Buddhism, which is a question that's being asked constantly here. He said that dignity is a primary element for every human being. Number two, the great message of equality, justice and fraternity was propagated by the son of India, Lord Buddha. And the untouchables were at one time in the history were the rulers of India, the Nagas. We need the dignity back, we need our pride back, and this is why we are following Lord Buddha. That was a comment I wanted to make it one. Second thing is on the Gandhi. Gandhi was a propagator of a caste system. He promoted in the caste system. And caste means violence. Caste means the degradation of the human beings, and violence. Violence means the Gandhi cannot be a peace apostle. He is when he promotes the caste system. And I admire the great work of Gopal Raju over the years, and I congratulate him for an excellent presentation of today's debate on Dr. Ambedkar as idealism. Thank you.
And Gopal, this is a very large question, so you can leave it like all the others till later. Okay? But since you raised the question of difference, okay.
Speaking to the mic.
All right. Since you mentioned difference, I just want to ask you a large question about that, which is, and clearly this is not Ambedkar's language, that's not the issue, but between you and me, difference, to my mind, is not a question of segments alone, right? Difference is a means of constituting the universal, right? It is central to the constitution of the universal. And so I just wonder what you make of that in terms of thinking about Ambedkar's universals.
Anu wants a question here. Is there somebody else at the back?
Maybe very quickly following on that prior question. I want to ask you, I know that you want to, in a sense, take Ambedkar in and outside his time. I want to, and we heard about Gandhi, I want to actually hear a little bit more about Ambedkar and Marx. Because I think this has something to do with the way that you're troubling this question of difference, and also what you're saying about the issue of co-responsibility. Because if indeed we are to think about Ambedkar as practicing a certain form of immanent thought, then the question of how he thinks dialectically and what it is he wants to constitute in terms of the ideal, I think also becomes quite important. And his thought, in a sense, has to then be distinguished or seen in conflict or conversation with Marx. And you said you had a bit there about Marx. I want to ask you about that.
Yes, sure.
I had a really a quick question. You were referring to segmented ways of reading Ambedkar through his constitutionalism, etc. And I wanted to know how you would, in fact, read the ideal, not through Buddhism alone, but the ways in which Ambedkar's transformation of Buddhism and his rewriting of Buddhism also entered into the political world he inhabited, and how, in fact, it might have transferred over into ways that he conceived of the Indian Constitution.
Gopal, I think you
Yeah,
should respond to that.
I think I should say that, you know, the choice of Buddhism for Ambedkar is not a one-time choice. It is emerging through a very painful process of relativization of options that are available, including constitutions. That is to say that I would not say, and Ambedkar would not say that. Actually, a lot of Dalits say, what is constitution? Constitution is the expression of Buddhism. That's what they say. And they are not wrong in saying so, because all these principles are there, the dignity and all that is there. So I think the reflection in constitution, we have to accept that. But I'm saying what is not in constitution, and which is there in Buddhism of Ambedkar, is something which is a normative question. Like, for example, there is no law which says right against untouchability is there. Is there a right to touch? I have a right to touch. That right is not there, show me. So I think that question is found only in the ethical, not in the constitutional and political. And that's why I think he's already moving beyond this limited versions of, redeeming of ideal. So that's, I think, but you are right that it is already reflected simultaneously, side by side in the Constitution, but it's moving ahead. Just as, in Phule and Ambedkar, it's an interesting debate actually, and I didn't touch upon it, and I defer all the important questions anyway, because I'm looking at Janaki and the chairperson.
Gopal, I'll cede all of my time to you. Happily.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Very generous of you. There is he's integrating what the critical impulses from all these traditions, but he's also going beyond those traditions actually. Like he may not agree with what Phule has said about the nirmik, the notion of nirmika and Phule. Ambedkar may not agree with that, no, because no way of agreeing. But he is not discounting on Phule. And that's why I think his ideal is emerging as an alternative ideal, not at the cost of really submerging Ambedkar's ideal into the dead water. He's not afloat because he's actually integrating it. So I think that's his ideal is worked out through the historical impulses. And it also, there's a very strong reference to Saint tradition. He's also is linked up to Tukaram, and Tukaram is a Buddhist anyway. The More, that our friend Sadanand More has worked out this combination. So there are several. That's why it's not the West. It's not purely the West. I think that point is still it requires some more explanation. That's the other one is about what Gyan has said about this. Does not difference really constitute the urge for the universal? That's the point you're making. I think yes, you are. I think you cannot really visualize any universal if you don't have the notion of false or notion of sameness. But sameness is there. You don't want to become like the Brahmin. You want to be a different. Don't want to be. So that you are using difference to really undercut the significance of the sameness, but you are not reifying the difference. You are moving ahead of the difference. And that is what the alternative lies. You are going beyond the difference. Because difference, if it is the difference, and I'm making reference to yesterday's speech, did Ambedkar really suggest different nation for Dalit? The answer is no. Because the ethical would never permit it. Because he wants to comfort the human being in the other. The other is the ideal, untouchable. And that's the great philosophical strength of Ambedkar. He is not subscribing, and subscribe is the right word, suggesting Buddhism for the Dalit. Yes, that is one, and women, that's one. But more importantly, those who are suffering, who are ill, are cast of mind, so to say. Okay? So I think and the difference is also ethical, as Thomas and Will having discussion yesterday. A difference has to be recognized. The recognition becomes an ethical challenge. But I think Dalit question is more than the recognition. And therefore I think there will be a debate again. Should we produce Dalit into a difference and minoritize him, as you use that word? The answer is no. It will be impossible. I think these are questions that we'll take up. And did I miss any? Ramaya, angry Buddhism will do that. And the dialectics. I think there's a very interesting conversation between Marxism and Ambedkarism, so to say. And I must give this dialectics in Janata's those speeches that were published by Arun Kamble in that book. You may not like it. It is the most delicate, and no Dalit Buddhists talk about this. See, the trajectory of ultimate is through French Revolution. Then the Russian Revolution. The ultimate is the Buddhist Revolution. And there's a dialectic happening there. So he is not rushing, and at that point rushing and reaching universal. At that point I won't explain. I think we'll explain it later. Later is always a good term. So that, and then he is using a very interesting metaphor of a Puran Podi. And the Puran Podi, the Puran is the Russian Revolution, but there is more than Puran Podi. There's the Buddhist. But we don't really quote any time. He is acknowledging the historical significance of French Revolution, but not enough, going ahead. Then he is acknowledging the contribution of the Russian Revolution, not enough, going ahead. And this is a very interesting dialectic happening in Ambedkar. And I only wish that he had survived some more years. It would have been a different story altogether. But let's see, we take it further in whatever small way. I'm not concluding. We can have some discussion. Yeah.
Can we take a couple more questions?
Yeah.
One more question?
Yeah, I just wanted to also enlarge on Sivakami's comment about Ambedkar's consistency versus Gandhi's contradictions. But what I wanted to point out is what's fascinating is that the very fact that Gandhi had all these contradictions is openly acknowledged by and even celebrated by those who are sort of bent on celebrating Gandhi. So the fact that he had these contradictions in his thinking, it's a paradox. It's one of the thing that's so wonderful about him. He encompassed contradictions, and this I think goes with the sort of family resemblance of thoughts that have been very prevalent. I think that the moment for them is past, but the thought that heterogeneity, fluidity, flexibility are necessarily subaltern strategies or necessarily work against power. The flip side being, power is necessarily monolithic, monological, rigid. But in fact, I think it is quite clear that power also operates by means of heterogeneity, by means of paradox, by means of fluidity, by means of flexibility. Okay.
One last question. Thomas? Okay.
I would have felt very sad.
If I didn't ask a question.
Buddha's face.
Yeah, it is about the face. Just a continuation of what we talked about yesterday. No, but your invocation of the Buddha's face and the smile and the discussion, I mean, that smile can mean many things.
Yes.
It can also mean, as my neighbor just said, a mocking kind of gesture.
Yes,
right? It
yes.
can mean a kind of, it's a sardonic smile
Yeah,
also.
absolutely.
But my real question is, today in India, it's not the smile of the Buddha that is important for the Mahas or for the Dalits. It's the face of Ambedkar, right?
Yeah.
And his demeanor, which is also has had a faint smile, dignified, calm. What do we make of that?
You are very skillfully planting tensions. But anyway, can I respond, sir? Okay. I have a very, very difficult question. I want to really duck this question actually. I don't want to answer this question. Yeah. But anyway, I have to have some, as Gan said, universities are for taking dialogue ahead. So, ruthlessly. And not ruthlessly here because of Buddha's smile. Passionate. I think there is a ultimate, there are, the evolution of phase has to be taken into consideration. And I think you see the mudra of Ambedkar, here actually he's wearing a chivar. And he's in the tonsuring and he's in a Buddha's image actually. This is a merger of the two. And now that's why the ideal. It's not actual. If it is actual, there's no need for discussion. It's an ideal you are really trying to reach, which is possible. Now, therefore, I think the ideal has a very, very important political function to perform. That really keeps motivating you towards your goal. If there is no ideal, it's a dampness and there's no future. So I think, and also it also sustains creativity in you. Why do you think poor really sustain and they don't revolt? Why? That's why there's a logic involved in this, Therefore, I think our ultimate ideal is to have that everybody is happy. Why should somebody anxious, somebody mocking somebody's agony? Why? That's not the order. That's not the decent society. And decent society is not right. That's not the order we are looking for. We are looking for the production of that very, very honest, authentic smile on the face without any qualification and attribution. So you don't have to produce a fake smile while you are shaking hands. The modernity does all that in any way. And also anonymity. Somebody mentioned this point. Aloysius made this point interesting. Anonymity is an ideal. Is anonymity an ideal? In Ambedkar, I think that's not the case. But he suggested that move away from the villages to the university, to the cities. Sleep up.
The Freudian slip there. One last question, which will segue nicely into the Sri Lankan lunch that we have waiting for you. So, one last question from Val.
Okay. Yes, hi. It's very short. How are you going to prevent...
I could have stood up for you, sir.
How are you going to... let me not say how are you going to... But are you concerned that idealization is going to morph into a deification of the Buddha?
I think I was avoiding this question again because for Dalit today in the country, idol has become an ideal. I don't want to say anything more than that, sir. That's it. Yeah. A very, very disturbing thing. So, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gopal.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So, since I ceded all of my time to Gopal, I will make this...
So much.
Absolutely,
So
anytime. I'll make this very brief. In good South Asian tradition, we're going to serve you a Sri Lankan meal. And by that, I literally mean serve you. South Asia staff, volunteers, students, we're going to stand behind the counter and serve you all a Sri Lankan meal. It's all out there. Thank you all so very much for coming. It's been a wonderful day and a half. And hopefully, as soon as I can get my fall fund drive started, I can do this again next year with all of your help.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah. Very good. That's a good point. Yeah.